Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today. Historical Men in Crisis. One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Historical Men in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Historical Men in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about two mass murderers, Richard Hickock and Perry Edward Smith, who participated in the infamous murder of the Clutter family back in 1959 and were the inspiration for Truman Capote's novel In Cold Blood. Now, Richard Hickock and Perry Edward Smith were known for participating in the infamous murder of the Clutter family in 1959. And Richard Hickock and Perry Edward Smith were basically like Pookie and Ray Ray, looking to try to score a payday based on a rumor of money being in a safe on the Clutter family's Kansas farm. And as both of these men went out here to participate in the robbery and murder of the Clutter family, they showed us all how they were men in crisis. Now, Perry Edward Smith was on the road to becoming a man in crisis due to the dysfunctional family he was a part of. Now, Perry Edward Smith was born to rodeo performers Florence Julia Flo Buckskin and John Tex Smith, and Florence Julia Flo Buckskin was a Native American woman, while John Tex Smith was a red-headed Irish man, and as they struggled to make a living on the rodeo circuit, they tried to raise a family. Unfortunately, as they were trying to raise a family, that family wound up becoming a family in crisis. Now, the family decided to move to Juneau, Alaska in 1929, where Tex Smith decided to do bootleg whiskey for a living, and as a result of the family being dysfunctional, with Flo basically being an alcoholic who was sexually promiscuous, and Tex being a very violent and abusive man, eventually the marriage dissolved, and Flo decided to take her 4 children in 1935 to San Francisco. And it was in San Francisco that Perry Edward Smith was raised with his alcoholic mother and wound up being in a family that was in shambles. And sadly, Perry Edward Smith actually walked in on his mother dead, who had choked on the vomit from drinking alcohol, and wound up passing away when he was 13 years old. And with no family to teach him male life skills or male survival skills, or teach him how to navigate life, Perry Edward Smith was brought to an orphanage at 13 years old, and there he was abused by nuns who were upset about him for having a problem of chronic bedwetting. However, the problem of chronic bedwetting for Perry Edward Smith was due to the destabilized environment that he grew up in, with an alcoholic mother and an abusive father, and being in that orphanage basically exacerbated things as related to his situation. And as things got worse for him in his situation, eventually in the orphanage, where he wound up leaving and then winding up reuniting to try to have an existence with his father, and wound up going in and out of juvenile detention homes, all while watching 2 of his other siblings winding up committing suicide. So this was a family with boys who were growing up to become men in crisis, and while Perry Edward Smith was living a miserable existence, his 2 brothers basically suffered so much that they just could not take life in that toxic home that they took their own lives, and the remaining sister eliminated all contact with him and the rest of his family because the family was so dysfunctional. Now, things were really bad for Perry Edward Smith, who decided that he wanted to join the U.S. Merchant Marines in 1948 and served in the Korean War, but still, because he had issues with male authority and male authority figures, he would spend weeks in the stockade for carousing and fighting with Korean civilians and soldiers. So the military didn't really give him any sort of discipline because he had really never been raised to learn self-control, because he saw both of his parents lacking this whole trait and never modeling this trait for him. So from the time he was 16 in 1948 to 1952, he struggled in the military and then in 1952 received an honorable discharge, and then tried to stay with an army friend in the Tacoma area who was a car painter, and he got a job as a car painter himself. And then he got, with one of his paychecks, he got a motorcycle to go back and forth to work, but sadly he lost control of the bike due to adverse weather conditions and nearly died in the accident. And then his legs were so badly injured that he was permanently disabled and dealt with leg pains for the rest of his life. So he basically was in a condition where he was just taking lots of aspirin. So he went from being in a home where he was a boy in crisis to a man in crisis dealing with an addiction to aspirin. And as he was out here, he eventually wound up going from a guy trying to make a living to winding up in prison. And this is where Perry Smith met Richard Hickok, who was the Ray of the pair. And once they met in prison, they decided to continue maintaining their relationship after Hickok's release in 1959. And this is where they decided to go out here and participate in the plan to go and rob the Clutter household on their Kansas farm. This is where they had the plan to go out here and participate in the murders of the Clutter family in order to get to a safe that allegedly was supposed to have $10,000 in it. And this was part of their plan, because both of these men, they thought, oh, we're going to go out here and be able to break on, because nobody would be around to hear them on the farm. They'd be able to go out here and participate in this robbery and be able to get away with this $10,000 and be able to go on with their lives. However, what happened with both of these individuals is they wound up finding that when they invaded the Clutter family home and murdered the family, they soon found that there was no money on the farm. There was no money in a safe. So both of these individuals basically went out here and participated in the murder of a family, all based on the rumors of someone from prison, and wound up putting their lives in a situation where they went from becoming men in crisis to men on death row. And with Perry Edward Smith, what he wanted to do again was go out here and score a big payday like Pookie and Ray. And both of these men basically showed how dangerous beta males are, because again, one of the things I've talked about constantly as related to beta males is that they do not go out here and think critically, and they take everything that's told to them as literal. And that's what really motivated both of these individuals to participate in this murder. The same way Pookie and Ray commit crimes, they go out here half-cocked on some sort of rumor someone has told them without doing any sort of research to find out if it's substantiated. No, these men act on impulse, run on emotion, and as they run on emotion based on what somebody has told them, based on their feelings regarding it, what happens is they wind up committing a heinous crime like Richard Hickok and Perry Edward Smith did when they murdered the entire Clutter family for $10,000. That's the main reason why both of these beta males participated in this murder, was because both of these men were basically greedy, and their greed wound up driving their emotions to act on impulse. And as they acted on impulse, they went out here and looked to take the lives of the Clutter family. And as a result, they eventually were caught by the police. And after they were caught by the police, they then were sentenced to death. And before Perry Edward Smith and Richard Hickok were sent to death row to suffer for their crimes, Truman Capote then decided to interview them for his book, in Cold Blood, which chronicled how they committed a story where the story of these murders were inspired from. And this whole story, again, was cold-blooded because these individuals basically were out here looking to take a family's life just for a rumor of some money, never critically thinking about making their own money legitimately. No, neither one of these men wanted to go out here and do this because both of these men, again, were caught up in their feelings of greed. And again, that's due to the dysfunctional way these males were raised. These males were raised never to go out here and learn basic life skills and basic survival skills, and that's how both of these men wound up becoming men in crisis whose life ends with being hanged, because that's what happened to Perry Edward Smith. Was his life ended on April 14th, 1965, when he was hung to death and punished for the murders of this heinous crime of murdering an entire family. And again, he just is the Pookie of this Pookie and Ray Ray pair, and their behavior is just like Pookie's and Ray Ray's. Again, men acting impulsively, but showing us how men wind up in crisis because they don't have a family to go out here and raise them properly. Now, Richard Hickok was the Ray Ray of this pair, and Richard Hickok basically was on the road to becoming a man in crisis due to the dysfunctional way he was raised and the numerous tragedies that he suffered through his life. Now, Richard Hickok was born to two farm worker parents, Walter Sr. and Eunice Hickok, and he was one of several siblings, including a younger brother named Walter Jr. And the home that Richard Hickok was raised in was extremely strict, and in that home where he was raised very strict, he got a lot of structure and order. Unfortunately, he didn't get a lot of male life skills or male survival skills in order to know how to navigate a course in the world. Now, Richard Hickok was a very popular athlete and a very popular student at Olathe High School. Unfortunately, he didn't know how to set a course for his life after high school, and because his family didn't have the money to finance him going to college or trade school, Richard Hickok wound up becoming a mechanic who married at 19, and as he married at 19, he got into an extramarital affair, which eventually resulted in the conception of his first child. Now, Richard Hickok decided to end his first marriage to marry his mistress, and they had two more children together. And as they had two more children together, Richard Hickok in 1950 had an automobile accident that basically led to him going on the road to being a man who was on the road to becoming a man in crisis. Now, Richard Hickok suffered multiple head injuries as a result of this accident in 1950. It disfigured his face, rendering it slightly lopsided and his eyes asymmetrical. And while this accident almost killed him, it also changed his personality, similar to what happened with Phineas Gage, a man who got a tamping rod put through his head and went from being a conscientious, responsible man to becoming a man in crisis who wound up participating in erratic behavior. Now, like Phineas Gage, Richard Hickok's personality basically wound up changing, and his personality changed to the point where he started reacting emotionally to pressures of the debts he has related to the hospital bills he had and mounting debts. And this is what led to him going out here to participate in things like writing bad checks and gambling. And instead of him staying at a job as a mechanic, he began drifting through several manual labor jobs, working as a railroad worker, working as a mechanic, working as an ambulance driver, and still continuing to write bad checks and commit petty theft. And eventually, all of his crimes caught up with him around 1958. And as those crimes wound up catching up with him in 1958 at the age of 26, this is where Ray Ray, or Richard Hickok, eventually wound up getting his first prison sentence for stealing a rifle out of a local home. And after he wound up stealing this rifle out of a local home and wound up being sentenced to prison, this is where his side piece, now turned wife, decided that she was going to go out here and end their marriage. And while he was serving that prison sentence in 1958, this is where she decided to divorce him as well. And this is where, and while Richard Hickok was in prison, he wound up meeting up with Perry Smith, the Pookie of the pair, and Floyd Wells, the latter who used to work with the Clutter family. And this is where Floyd Wells went out here and told both Richard Hickok and Perry Edward Smith that there was a whole bunch of money inside of the Clutter family house and that there was $10,000 in the safe. Now, after hearing this story from Floyd Wells, this is where Pookie and Ray Ray decided to participate in a caper where they decided they were going to rob and murder the Clutter family. And this is where they decided, after serving their time in prison, they were going to go out here and make a plan to commit these crimes. Now, Hickok was released in 1959 after serving 17 months. After being released from prison, he got a job in a body shop in Olane, Kansas. However, what happened was Perry Edward Smith contacted him, the Pookie of the pair, and they decided to go out here and participate in this crime. And they decided to participate in this crime because with beta males, oftentimes they get so in their emotions about the greed that it makes them act on those impulses, never thinking critically about the consequences of their actions. And that's what happened here as related to this Pookie and Ray Ray pair, Perry Smith and Richard Hickok. We had two individuals who basically were poor and struggling, already had prison records, but because they were in their emotions and caught up in their greed, what happened was they decided to act on their impulses, go out here and then try to go out here and participate in one of the most violent murders, believing that if they could go out here and take the life of this family, who they were told were so affluent, they went out here and created a delusion in their minds. Oh, this family is so affluent and we have a right to take their lives. And as they went on to this property looking for this money, what they did was go out here and torture. They invaded the home of the Clutter family on their Kansas farm, tortured the father before winding up shooting him in the head with a shotgun, shooting the son with a shotgun, shooting the daughter with a shotgun, and the mother with a shotgun. And as they searched the property, they found absolutely no money, because everything that they had been told was basically rumors. And again, because these beta males basically take everything that somebody says as the truth without ever thinking critically about it, they went out here and acted on impulses, taking the lives of an entire family, all based on the word of another felon. And again, this is what beta males do, because again, beta males don't have good critical thinking skills. They don't have the ability to use logic and reason. And this is one of the reasons why they wind up in prison, because they go out here and act on their impulses, never thinking about the consequences of their actions. No, all they were thinking about was getting to that safe and getting that $10,000, not understanding that this guy who was in prison, maybe years have passed, and maybe while that guy was affluent at one time, he wasn't anymore. And again, that never dawned on these individuals because they were caught up in their greed, looking for a fast payday. But that fast payday led to them quickly being captured by police. And as they were captured by police, both of these men wound up confessing to the crimes. And Hickok was basically, you had Smith trying to say that he did the shooting, and then you had Smith saying that Hickok did the shooting. So both men basically wound up flipping on each other. And as they wound up flipping on each other, they showed how beta males really aren't loyal. And again, beta males, they put themselves in these situations because beta males are not good thinkers. Again, they just go on what they're told, and that's why they can be easily misled, be told what they want to hear, and if it's what they want to hear, they go along with it, not understanding that, going along with something that's criminal can lead to you winding up in prison. Now, Richard Hickok and Smith wound up in prison, and as they wound up in prison for the murders of the Clutter family, they wound up getting sentenced to death. And as they were sentenced to death in Kansas, both men basically wound up getting hanged in Kansas. Hickok was executed at 12:41 by hanging, and Smith followed at 1:19. Now, Smith wanted to say that capital punishment was legally and morally wrong, but he didn't see how it was legally and morally wrong for him to make this plan to take this family's lives over some rumors as related to money, and it really showed how he never had any remorse. But Hickok basically accepted things and just shook the agent's hands and said goodbye, showing how he basically was a man in crisis who accepted his fate and accepted the consequences of being a Pookie and Ray Ray. Because when I look at the story of Richard Hickok and Smith, I really see how both men were basically reminding me a lot of the Pookies and Ray Rays in the neighborhood, and how many of these men basically think they're going to go out here and participate in some caper and get some fast money. But what happens is these men wind up getting caught, and as they get caught, they wind up having to deal with consequences they never thought of, because with beta males, they never think about the effect of the actions they're causing. They never think about the consequences of their actions. And this is what happens when you have beta males. Again, beta males will go out here and participate in a heinous crime, thinking about the fast money they're going to get, not thinking about the long-term consequences of their actions. Now, this whole incident was so troubling that author Truman Capote basically went out here and decided to interview both men as related to writing his book In Cold Blood. And the book basically was written as related to this incident in cold blood about a family that's murdered by two criminals, and it lets people get to know the mind inside of these criminals. So the entire book, In Cold Blood, was basically inspired by the murder of the Clutter family, but the murder of the Clutter family happened because of two beta males who had been raised dysfunctionally, and as these boys who grew up raised dysfunctionally grew up to become men in crisis, they didn't know how to problem solve and how to navigate a course of life to move their lives forward. No, they went to extremes and looked to commit crimes because they were greedy and they wanted to make fast money, because they thought, oh, they were entitled to go take somebody's money because their lives were miserable. And because they believed their lives were miserable, they believed they had a right to go out here and take somebody's money and take their lives. And again, this is the type of beta male reasoning that's out there, because many beta males never, again, think about other people or regard other people's lives. No, it's usually all about them. And because it's all about them and all about what they want, what they do is believe that it's their right to go out here and take people's lives and take their property. And again, that's what was really driving these two individuals like Pookie and Ray Ray get driven. And again, this is what led to these men winding up on the road to becoming men in crisis, and eventually wound up with them being executed on death row. Now, if you want to learn more about what motivates beta males to participate in their dysfunctional and violent behaviors, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwares, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to see me make more videos about historical men in crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.